Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good to have you guys all here, and good morning to everybody that's chiming in from wherever they may be, remote or elsewhere. Thanks everybody for taking the time to tune in to NAIOP Live. And we're excited today because we're talking about the Utah Inland Port, and really want to be able to talk through what that looks like, what's happening out in the Northwest Quadrant, what we can all expect, what are we reading in the news versus what's actually occurring, and just really kind of get a good feel for that. Before we get into the meat of the conversation today, though, we wanted to make sure that we, first of all, thanked our today's major sponsor, which is GSBS Architects, and wanted to turn the time over to you, Scott, for a few comments from you and GSBS, and thanks again for your sponsorship.
Great, our pleasure. Thank you, Josh, and good morning. On behalf of GSBS Architects, we welcome you to this video event to discuss the future of the inland port. My name is Scott Henriksen, a principal at GSBS Architects, and to us this is a vital topic, especially to all Wasatch Front residents. I think that GSBS has designed nearly 10 million square feet of manufacturing, warehouse, and distribution space, much in partnership with many of you who are on this call today. We thank you for that, and I think that currently we have about 1 million square feet of industrial space in various stages of design and construction. We know the economic potential of the inland port, and we all want to play a role in making sure it's done in a way that's safe, smart, and highly sustainable. So thank you to NAIOP, our panelists, and to each of you for allowing GSBS to host this important discussion today. Josh, back to you.
Thank you, Scott, and thanks again, GSBS, for being our partner today. And we also need to make sure that as we get rolling in this, that we recognize that NAIOP has a lot of partners and a lot of sponsors for a variety of our events, and ultimately are who help us make it possible for us to do what it is that we do at NAIOP Utah. So with that, we want to make sure that we recognize our platinum sponsor, who is Zions Bank, and our silver sponsors, who are Layton Construction, Hamilton Partners, Big D Construction, Colliers International, Mortenson, and CBRE, as well as our bronze sponsorship with Harris Mechanical and Newmark Knight Frank. So thanks again to all of our sponsors, especially GSBS today, for your support. So with that, let's turn it over to the reason why we're all chimed in today, and that's really just to hear more about what's happening out at the port. And we're lucky to have both Jack and Ginger on the call today. Jack is the Executive Director at Utah's Inland Port Authority, and Ginger is the Managing Director of Business Development at the Utah Inland Port Authority. Certainly, I think the people to talk to as far as getting what is, I think, the most accurate and timely information about what's happening out there. So good morning, Jack, and good morning, Ginger. Great to have you guys on.
Thank you.
Obviously, again, we're talking about what has been billed as the state's largest ever economic development, and with 16,000, give or take, developable acres out in the Northwest Quadrant. There's a lot of interest, particularly from the Utah real estate industry, and I would say a large portion of who is on the call today and who from the NAIOP Utah audience is going to have interest is representing, professionals in that industry. And so I feel like today's call really is an opportunity for you guys to speak to that audience, talk through, what that looks like, how that impacts Utah, especially from the real estate vantage point, but also just in general. There is a lot of impact from this project for everybody in Utah. And so I think today, really, we want to be able to talk through what that looks like with you. As we get started, it'd be nice, really, if we could get maybe just a little bit of background from both of you. So if you could take a moment, Jack, and then Ginger, to just introduce yourself, give us just a brief background real quick, that'd be great.
Well, sure. Well, thanks, Josh. We really appreciate the opportunity today, and thank you to NAIOP and to GSBS for setting this up today and putting this together. This is you're right. This is a great opportunity for the state, for development in the state, for economic impact in the state, and great opportunity for me personally. That's why I came here. I came from the Port of Los Angeles, where I was the head of cargo and industrial real estate, and basically ran the state's real estate, the port's real estate portfolio and real estate operations. And we were a landlord port, so that was the core function of the operation. Before that, I was at the Port of Tacoma, so I have port experience on two of the major West Coast, or the three major West Coast gateways. And understand a little bit about how cargoes flow between the different West Coast gateways and their different market areas that they serve. And part of that, I was in industrial development, not just in the United States, but internationally as well. So I've got a development and project finance background, as well as a port and logistics background. So that's where I come from. Ginger's got a lot more interesting background than I do.
Well, I'm really excited to be here. I'm actually the newest hire for the inland port, and I've been with the port for about 8 months, I think. And prior to that, I was with the Governor's Office of Economic Development. And when I was at the Governor's Office, I oversaw rural and urban business services. So our cluster initiatives, a lot of work in rural to rural economic development, working with various industries across the state. And when the inland port concept came along, it just was really intriguing to me. And I had the opportunity to meet with Jack and talk about how we can build this out and do it in a smart way. You know, Utah's growing. We know that. We're one of the fastest growing states in the nation. And how do we manage that growth, and what does that look like? And so like I said, I'm fairly new to the inland port, but really excited to work with the whole state system. And I know that we'll talk a little bit later on the call about what that means to be a state system and how we're building that out. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. I think you both kind of touched on it, but probably the best place to start really is what is an inland port? And Jack, you kind of touched on your experience at the Port of Los Angeles and the Port of Tacoma, and certainly those are coastal ports. And I think a lot of us have at least a basic understanding of what that is and what that means from a supply chain standpoint. But what is an inland port? How is that different? And what does that look like?
Yeah, it's a great question, because the term inland port kind of gets thrown around a lot. A lot of industrial parks, industrial developments, distribution centers, distribution hubs sort of tout themselves as inland ports. But really, to be an inland port, sort of definitionally, you've got to have that direct connection to a port, and a direct sort of forward deployment and forward staging relationship with the port. Interestingly, here in Utah, we have that direct relationship and that sort of connection with the three major West Coast gateways. So we are uniquely positioned amongst inland ports in the United States. So there's direct road and rail connection to LA Long Beach, and cargo gets moved here directly and gets staged here to move out there directly. Same thing with Oakland, and the same thing with Seattle, Tacoma. So we have very unique position here in the North American logistics system. We're also almost exactly halfway between those three ports and the major distribution centers of the Midwest. So between here in Chicago, Kansas City, Dallas, Fort Worth, Memphis, those big distribution hubs in the Midwest, we're almost equidistant from there. So we really are uniquely positioned. And I like to say, if you took the map of the United States and turned it up like this, it looked like a funnel flowing through Utah. So nothing like that anywhere else in the world that I'm aware of. So that unique connection is really what's driving us.
Well, we're known as the Crossroads of the West, and I think everything you're talking about and what we're seeing happening out there is really, if nothing more, very illustrative of that idea.
That's right. That's right. And we are truly building, standing on the shoulders of giants here.
Sure.
All that infrastructure that was out there, that crossroads of the interstate freeways, the 80, the I-84, I-15, those major road connections, the major Class 1 rail connections. back to both, back to those West Coast ports and the airport, and the air cargo opportunities that has. That was all done long before we all got here, and we are all the beneficiaries of that. So the idea now is to what do we do with that going forward, and what else do we have around the state that we can build on? But what do we do with that going forward? What's the 21st century of logistics look like? What is, we're taking a 30, 50, 100-year look at what does logistics look like going forward, and what do we need to do to take advantage of it and continue to be the crossroads of the West? Or as one of the gubernatorial candidates, who I swear stole my line, move from being the crossroads of the West to crossroads of the world. So.
Awesome.
Well,
That's a
and
good
really,
line.
Josh, to add to that, if you drive out in our jurisdictional area and you see what's happening now, there really exists an inland port already. It's just the ability to look at it, think about how it can grow, how we can build it out in a smarter way is really our charge.
Absolutely. And I think it's probably really simply, but also important to note, just geographically, we keep throwing out this Northwest quadrant idea, and I think most people understand what that means, but can you give just those of us who maybe need a little more clarity on what that means for locations, municipalities? This is a big area of land. Where exactly does this fit in, geographically speaking, in this valley?
Yeah, so it is a big area of land. You mentioned earlier, it's about 16,000 acres of jurisdictional boundary. About 9,000 acres of that is actually developable, still developable. There's a lot of development out there already. There's a lot of infrastructure out there already. It basically is on both sides of I-80, both north and south of I-80, from the airport over to the Kennecott tailing ponds, and then down into West Valley City, north at about kind of along parallel the northern edge of the airport. So it's that whole industrial space that's out there, and it is industrial space. The intermodal rail ramp is out there currently. There is about, if not in the jurisdictional boundary, then next to the jurisdictional boundary, there are tens of millions of existing industrial space out there now. There's about 6 million square feet of industrial space under development in the area now. And about another, you could see potentially develop another 50 plus million square feet of industrial space developed in the area. So it's already a booming area. It will continue to grow.
One misnomer, I think, as we're speaking about location on this overall inland port, that maybe you guys can help clear up, is that this is the Utah's inland port. This is the development that's been making a lot of the headlines. But recently, there have been some other similar in Utah areas for some sort of a similar type of concept. This is not the Tooele location that we've heard about. That's a totally separate deal. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, that's correct. And Ginger, maybe talk a little bit about some of the other locations that we've preliminarily identified and why.
Yeah, absolutely. So to kind of give a little bit of history on the inland port concept was created out of the 2018 legislature. And in that bill, it references the statewide system that I talked to in my intro. And it was interesting because when I came and joined the port, almost every county came forward and said, we want to have an inland port and we want to be the first. And what does that look like? So Jack and I set out in our cars and did several windshield tours across the entire state. And it became pretty obvious that we have to have a business case. You just cannot build an inland port per se, and then they will come. You have to have a strong business case as to why the area makes sense. So as we started to look at this whole statewide system, we're currently in the process right now of doing an asset map. What exists? What do we currently have? And by assets, I'm talking infrastructure related to rail, access via major freeway highway system, higher education, technical education, because these are going to create jobs that are going to be technical. So what's the workforce like? What's the water? What's the power opportunities? What movement, what goes through those areas currently right now in terms of goods? What are we importing into the state? What are we taking out of the state? So we've been doing this asset map, and working with the Utah Association of Counties on building out this asset map. And the Association of Counties is looking to the Association of Governments as we're looking at this. But to cut to the chase, some of the 4 key areas that we've seen, one is the Box Elder area. Box Elder, it was a direct link to I-84. We were kind of blown away by the amount of goods that were flowing through that area with cold chain, frozen meats, frozen produce, just the frozen goods coming from Boise area. If you think Simplot, bringing frozen potatoes down. So that's one area that has a lot of opportunity and a lot of infrastructure. So we're looking at that area. Then the Carbon and Emory counties. We already know coal is going away. There's a steep decline in coal, but the assets that were built there were for coal. And how can we repurpose those assets, and what does that look like? And its connection to the east. And then additionally, Cedar City. If you look at Cedar City, Iron County, Beaver County puts a lot of hay out. We're looking at those areas as well. Cedar City already has a manufacturing base, Port 15, the higher education that we referenced, and its connection to the West Coast, Nevada, Arizona. And then also Tooele, and you mentioned the Tooele property, and it's not necessarily the Tooele property that's right by the raceway. Tooele is large, and there's a lot of land, and there's a lot of opportunity, and geographically it just makes sense. So those are kind of the 4 key areas that we're initially looking at.
Yeah, that's kind of the low-hanging fruit, that we found, just kind of based on some of our preliminary studies. And but like Ginger said, we've got this really detailed asset map that we're doing with Utah Association of Counties, partnering with them to help identify these things and find other opportunities.
Sure. Well, I appreciate that, and thanks for the clarity. I think one of the questions, well, obviously, with given the fact that this is a NAIOP Utah conversation, and again, most of our audience members are going to be, professionals in the real estate industry. A lot of today's conversation is really going to be focused around, especially that component, what the developments look like, what are the impacts from, a real estate standpoint, but just kind of higher level, just speaking to, Utah citizens, how does the Utah inland port affect the average Utahn? Like what can we expect are some of the overall impacts just for the day-to-day Utahn?
Well, I think if one thing that has come from the pandemic and the lockdown and the disruption of supply chains is we all now are acutely aware of where all our stuff comes from. It doesn't just magically appear on your store shelves or in your Amazon box. It has to come from somewhere. It's being manufactured somewhere, it's being produced somewhere, and it's being shipped to us. So how that gets to us is now a little more front of mind than it ever used to be before. It was easy to dismiss it. It was easy to ignore it. It's no longer easy to do. The pandemic has also pointed out, I think, to a lot of companies and manufacturers and producers just how fragile their supply chains were, just how disruptible they were, and how non-resilient they were. So I think that what is going to be important for the future, and this is why we continually talk about the future of logistics and what logistics needs to look like. It is a much smarter supply chain. It is a much more resilient and sustainable supply chain. And it's a much more equitable and inclusive supply chain. It is, for lack of a better term, it is smarter, it is safer, and it is more equitable, more inclusive. The money, the capital markets are driving change. The capital markets abhor risk, and sustainability, equity, and intelligent systems are seen as being less risky. And so for that reason, we think you have to take this longer term view, and building things the way we built them, even the way we thought about building them a year ago or 3 years ago or 5 years ago is passé. If we don't understand what's happening in the logistics world, if we don't understand what's happening with supply chains, how they're being reorganized, how they're being restructured, and what the customer needs in terms of access to data, in terms of the ability to automate, in terms of zero emissions capabilities for their fleets, and zero emissions from their buildings and things like that, then they will go around us, and the capital won't flow here, and if capital doesn't flow, then the jobs won't be created. So we've got to think about what the future of logistics looks like, and not what's just the most expedient thing to do, or the thing that we're used to. It's time to change how we do business.
Absolutely. You touched on a lot of things, but two things really in particular that I feel like are probably going to be a theme throughout this conversation and many that you have over the next, 10 plus years, call it. And those are really sustainability and innovation. And sustainability takes a lot of different forms and functions as to what that means and how we define that. But I am curious, especially as it relates to the Inland Port strategic plan that you just released. What role does that innovation and sustainability play in how you've planned this out? And as kind of a side note to that, I know a lot of us have read, or at least been following some of the headlines in the paper and the recent agreements with the city, and I know Rocky Mountain Power plays a role in some of what that innovation and sustainability looks like. Can you kind of speak to all of that from an infrastructure standpoint all the way up through physical development?
Yeah. Thanks, Josh. It is critically important, and it's a key pillar of our strategic plan and our strategy going forward, is to push, drive, incentivize, however you want to call it, the kind of development that leads to more sustainable business practices, more sustainable use, smarter uses, smarter, more innovative developments. And so, we're sort of creating our lines of business around promoting those things. Our role as the Port Authority, because we're not the landlord here, we're not the owner, the property owner. Our role as the Port Authority is to help to promote that smart, sustainable, equitable logistics movement, and Utah is a place for that. So we see our role as being one, to create the infrastructure that supports those kinds of technologies, the deployments of those types of technologies in Utah, and the agreement with Rocky Mountain Power, for example, goes a long way toward doing that. One of the objectives of that agreement is for the inland port and the users in the inland port to be able to have 100% renewable energy supplies in the inland port, and to generate as much of that as possible from the inland port. So where can we install rooftop solar? Industrial buildings with rooftop solar make a lot of sense. Battery storage, but what are some other things we can do as well? What can we do in terms of providing future infrastructure for hydrogen, for use with hydrogen fuel cells for trucks, with LNG and ultimately renewable natural gas from methane and things like methane recapture and things like that as alternatives to diesel and other more polluting forms of fuel. So the infrastructure around being able to do that. Deploying smart infrastructure, help building out smart infrastructure that supports the deployment of 5G, wireless technology and things like that, because automation and the data collection at gates, at truck gates, at warehouse facilities, at the rail yard, that's going to need 5G type wireless connectivity to be able to function and be able to operate appropriately. And then just from a development standpoint, what are the things that we need to do to promote high efficiency buildings, low impact lighting, because we want to take into consideration, what are the impacts on the habitat area around the lake, the water that's running off of our facilities that winds up in the lake, and the impacts, the noise, the light, but the traffic and the pollution impacts on the communities that surround this area. And so looking at those things as well are programs and policies that we'll develop, and that's where we think that's our role, is to sort of shoulder that burden and to help push those things along in a way that makes sense financially and support the business model, support the business case for the developers and for the users who will be utilizing the inland port.
Sure.
So,
So,
oops, sorry,
right, go
Josh,
ahead.
tag on to what Jack was saying. One thing that was really fascinating to me, we keep hearing about California cracking down on emission standards. And by 2024, there's going to be a huge push to electrify all of these trucks and the equipment. And if we don't invest in some of these infrastructure that Jack is referencing for sustainable opportunities, such as charging stations and these alternative fuels, we will get all of California, all of what California doesn't want. And that is the last thing that we want in the state of Utah. We want to be business friendly, but we also need to invest and be forward thinking on how we're going to invest in some of this infrastructure.
Right. At a large scale, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
We're talking about looking forward and trying to be innovative with systems and requirements that that support a 16,000 acre, site ultimately. And how do you determine what that infrastructure looks like, and how do you figure out what electrification of vehicles looks like, and battery storage? And certainly, you guys, I'm sure, are working through the plans of that. But I think, especially, I know that there's a lot of concern, not just surrounding the inland port, but just in general in the Salt Lake Valley about air pollution and air quality. And that's really a huge issue for all of us. And my understanding is that, especially with this agreement with the Rocky Mountain Power, part of what you're trying to address is that issue as it relates to the influx of potential traffic. Can you talk a little bit more specifically about what that electrification of vehicles looks like and what that requirement might be?
Yeah, I mean, and I think the appropriate role for us and for Rocky Mountain Power is to create the infrastructure that supports the deployment. I mean, electric trucks are more expensive up front than the traditional diesel truck. Even the newer diesel models that are highly efficient and 98% less polluting than they were just a few years ago. Electric trucks are incrementally more expensive than they are. Zero emissions vehicles, though, interestingly enough, have fewer parts to break and have just less operating costs. So the O&M cost of a battery electric vehicle or some of the other technologies that are coming about are actually less expensive to operate over time. There's limitations on them though, and things like that. So one of the things we want to do is we think the buying the truck and operating the truck over its life cycle, that's going to make sense, but not if the infrastructure is not there to support them. Not if the infrastructure is not in place to allow them to be deployed in an effective manner. So that's one of the things that we're looking at, and that's one of the beauties of the satellite port concept, is we can take a statewide view, and we're not just focused just on the area out here on the west side of Salt Lake City, the northwest quadrant, and the electrical infrastructure to support deployment of electric vehicles in that area, but up and down the corridors, up and down I-80, up and down I-15. Where do we need to be? What trucking companies are going to want to deploy battery electric? What cargo owners and warehouse owners want to deploy battery electric? And where can we put that infrastructure to support that deployment so that they can deploy and feel comfortable with deploying that type of vehicle, that kind of truck? So that's just one example of how we're going to look at doing things.
Okay. Just so I'm clear too, I mean, when we're talking about traffic and traffic impacts, the requirements that potentially will be in place at the inland port and surrounding, we're talking short haul, we're talking medium haul. At some point though, there's a long haul version of what this all looks like. And give me an idea, just like how immediate you see some of those requirements on various aspects of what the supply chain wants to look like.
Yeah, there's a very real long haul aspect to it. Both cargo coming to Utah, but also cargo moving through Utah. We're one of the biggest transit ways of cargo movements, goods movement in the United States. There's literally a triangle of truck movements. That's LA Long Beach, Oakland, Salt Lake, and back. Trucks just move on that triangle in various directions around. So it's a multi-pronged approach. I mean, one of the things is, yes, to build out the infrastructure so that zero emissions trucks can be deployed. But it's also looking at working with the railroads to try to come up with ways to move more of that cargo as appropriate onto rail. That's another area where the satellite ports come in. If we can divert cargo or disperse cargo to these other areas and locations, rather than having it all have to come to Salt Lake City, that's a benefit. So it's a multi-pronged approach that we have to take to doing this. And it's going to take a lot of different players and a lot of different partnerships with the trucking companies, with the cargo owners, with the carriers, the railroads, all those folks. We're going to have to work together to come up with these plans and these programs that starts to shift how we move goods. And that's one of the areas where we really think, looking at understanding what the assets are around the state, how they've been used in the past, how they can be redeployed and repurposed, and how, what cargoes, what goods we can move to that, what's the business case around that, will have a huge impact on goods movement through the state. Make it more efficient, but also start to ratchet down some of the intensity that we see out here in Salt Lake City.
Yeah, and it's multimodal too. Jack mentioned rail and truck, and then there's the air cargo. With our location to the airport, it's really advantageous for us to take advantage of some of that air opportunity. And we've been working with UDOT's Division of Aviation, and there's 42 airports in the state of Utah that people aren't aware of. There's opportunities to take advantage of multi-modes of goods movement.
Did you just say 42?
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize that.
I had no idea. I'm not a barometer of knowledge on that anyway, but that's surprising to me. So kind of speaking still along that vein, it's great to hear the strategies, the plans, and that this innovation and sustainability concept is a huge driver for what your plan looks like and the overall development out there. But how will you know if that's a success? Like, what is your gauge for success on, especially from the innovation and sustainability standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, at a high level and at a strategic level, it's starting to see that those capital flows come here. It's starting to see developments and users that are implementing these newer technologies, these locating here because they see the opportunity to automate, to create those next generation jobs, sort of replacing those sort of lower level, lower pay, traditional kind of warehouse jobs with higher pay, jobs that are more technically advanced and more technically sustainable going forward. But to me, one of the best ways you start to measure it is start seeing those capital inflows. Start seeing companies choosing to locate here because of the supply chain advantage of being here, the ability to deploy their technology, the ability to innovate, the ability to create, and the ability to attract and sustain those higher function jobs than maybe what you've seen in the past. It's a little bit different metric. It's not sort of the traditional economic development metric. Right. It's a different metric.
Okay. So shift gears with me for just a moment. Because I know there have been a lot of questions about what the taxing wants to look like, the involvement with the municipalities, because there are a number of municipalities kind of touching the overall area. Can you talk through just how the Port Authority functions, what the taxing, enforcement, development, incentives, et cetera, look like out that way?
Yeah, and it's really very straightforward. The incremental property tax over the 2019 property tax revenues that go to all the different jurisdictions, the increment above that flows to the Port Authority now. And the Port Authority can use that to build infrastructure, quite frankly. That's what we can do with it. We can use it to build infrastructure that serves port purposes, so goods movement, logistics, those kinds of things, and meets our strategic goals of sustainability smart technologies and those kinds of things. So we can use it in that way. It's not a traditional sort of way of using a property tax increment that's been used in the past of, here's a gift back to a developer for their property tax. It's an aggregation of that property tax, and we're going to use that property tax. How we're going to use it is leverage that property tax, use it to back the issuance of bonds, and leverage that property tax up so that we have more access to capital over the next several years to be able to deploy in that area and really build the type of infrastructure that supports these types of developments going forward. So the value add is a much greater increment as a system than it is on an individual kind of parcel by parcel basis. That's how we're using the tax increment. In the last legislative round, we had previously had an appeal right on from permitting and things like that with the municipalities. We no longer have that. That was deemed as being something that frankly was overstepping, and that is a city's purview, and that should be the city's purview. So that was eliminated. So the cities have all the permitting and land use and entitlement. The cities and counties have all the permitting and entitlement regime that you would find anywhere else, that you would find in a normal setting. What we're trying to do is work with those cities and try to develop, if you will, an overlay that creates some incentives for developers to sort of move toward these more sustainable goals. And hopefully, I mean, one of the ideas we're talking about is if we do that, could there be a streamlined permitting process? If you can tick these boxes, if you're doing things in this way, if you're building these types of buildings, you get a streamlined permitting process. So it gives you more certainty and less cost around your permitting and some of your soft costs that maybe you don't always have, or maybe you worry about in some cases. This would go a long way, I think, to addressing some of those fears.
And to that end, it's going to require public-private partnerships and investments, and so we're going to have to work some angles all the way around it, not just simply tax increment.
And like you mentioned earlier, there's a lot of development already occurring, having already occurred. Presumably there have already been some public-private partnerships of some variety that have been working out that way, and I'm assuming there's a model that the port has found has been successful thus far. Do you see any sort of particular model as it relates to what a public-private partnership wants to look like, how private entities, developers, investors, companies ultimately want to operate out there, what that looks like as far as a partnership with the state or the municipalities or just the public entity?
Yeah, I mean, the municipalities and the state through other mechanisms still have those abilities to do some of those deals that were done back in the past. But our mandate isn't to continue to do those types of deals. Those will come from other entities. Our mandate is really to take those things and look. So what we're looking at is, for example, what's the best way to maximize and optimize rail access into and out of the area? Ensuring that we have dual access, ensuring that we have dual service from both Class 1s. Well, that comes in the form of infrastructure. That doesn't necessarily come in the form of building somebody a facility or giving somebody a tax break to build a facility, because that doesn't take care of the issue, right? So we're looking at how do we deploy those incremental tax funds that we get, the portion that we get, in a broader sense, in a more normal sense. As we develop other programs and projects, one of the things we're looking at is to incentivize these higher efficiency developments and lower impact developments. If there's an incremental cost there over what you normally would do, how do we participate in that? And how do we defray or defer that cost so that it doesn't put a developer at a disadvantage economically to incorporate those kinds of practices into their building? Looking at creating heavy haul corridors, heavy haul infrastructure that will support the overweight movement of goods into and out of in the system without tearing up the streets and roads that that people need to have to drive on. Doing some of those kinds of things. and deploying the higher tech infrastructure that will allow for all users to have a better, more efficient, more effective data usage, whether it be you have better connectivity on your cell phone, all the way to you want to run, automated stacking cranes in your yard, and the ability to do that. So that's really, in the shorter term, those are the kinds of things we're going to see. And those are the kinds of things where public-private partnerships become important, because those technology, especially those technology developments, are, they're innovative, they're creative, they require more risk capital than you might typically see. And there is a risk capital investor group out there that's looking for places to invest, looking for places to deploy. And that's one area where I think we'll see in the near term, these real public-private partnerships, sort of that true 3P approach to doing things. I think that's where we'll start to see some of that capital get deployed.
Absolutely. And it sounds, and again, considering the audience for sure, I mean, I think that's exciting for us to hear. And this is progress to the nth degree, in the sense that this is a conversation that really feels like it's pushing Utah to, the forefront of a number of conversations that relate to what public-private partnerships look like, and what relate to large-scale developments with massive, innovation and sustainability efforts. So speaking kind of just to that excitement quotient, if you will, obviously both of you come from backgrounds and experience that lend themselves quite a bit to what you're doing. But aside from your resume, what gets you excited about doing this, and ultimately, why did you sign on, right? And as a follow-up to that, why should the average Utahn also be excited about what's happening out here?
Ginger, go first.
Oh, you're gonna make me go first. I love it. For me, I got really excited mostly by the vision. When you're talking, you can drive around and look at warehouses and think, oh, this is going to be another industrial park. That doesn't seem very exciting to me. But after I sat down and visited with Jack and started to learn about the vision, and it's not just warehouses, it's the smart infrastructure that we're talking about, but beyond that, it's advanced technologies, it's automation, it's artificial intelligence, it's 5G. We're talking about building out the future for Utah and making a difference, and talking about the environment and utilizing these technologies to help with the right types of building, the sustainable builds. And there just aren't opportunities like that come along, and especially building out a statewide system. There's a lot of power in that, in the ability to really shape the way some of our rural economies are going to move forward. And I think in being in economic development and talking to our rural communities, we're always looking for something that's going to be the panacea to help with the economic development. And to find something that's connecting the entire state, that's going to build out economic opportunities, those don't come along very often, and it just makes me excited to be a part of it.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think for me, it was just simply, it was the scope, the size, the opportunity to really do something that changes the game. I grew up in Texas. I lived in the Seattle, Tacoma area for a long time. I lived in LA for a long time. And the ability to do something of this size and scope and really, really change the game, really, really have an impact and be that innovative thought leader was really a unique opportunity. And I'm not aware of any other opportunity like this, frankly, anywhere in the world, but certainly not in the United States. It is really, it's really challenging, but if we are thoughtful about it and if we're intentional about what we do, we will lead the nation. We will lead the nation in recovery from this pandemic. We will lead the nation in innovation and moving forward into the 21st century. And if we lead this nation, we will lead the world in doing that. And that is really exciting. to Ginger's point, logistics isn't one of those if you build it they will come kinds of things. It's really the backbone of an economy. If our economy is going to be strong and going to be continue to grow and support what we need as a population in this state going forward, we need a strong, robust logistics system. Where the if you build it they will come piece does come in is because we're sort of at this evolutionary moment in logistics. If we build it in the right way, if we build it with an eye to the future, if we start building things that are smart and sustainable and equitable, then we will drive investment. It will drive economic activity. And not only here on the Wasatch Front, but around the state. It's a real opportunity to bring true economic opportunity to some of the areas around the state that haven't seen some in a while.
This is exciting, and I think definitely what I would be tuning into if I wasn't talking to you right now. But tell me, just like stay on that vein for just a second. Talk to me about what needs to happen now in order to achieve that opportunity, in order to realize what it is we're trying to realize in this big picture. What do we need to see happen next?
Yeah, I think one of the things we need to start seeing happen next is really, first of all, talking to our local lawmakers, our local policy advisors. I heard somebody say the other day, change doesn't come from Washington, D.C., it goes to Washington, D.C. Well, the same is true at City Hall and the same is true at Capitol Hill, right? Change goes to them. If we really want to try to change logistics and really want to try to push this forward and really want to grasp this brass ring now that's in front of us, then we need to start pushing for more change, more investment, more investment in innovation and creativity and long-term thinking, and less sort of around maintaining the status quo. We need to be thoughtful and we need to be intentional with our public dollars and our public policy. I think that's something that would be helpful. We need to change, and just on the ground from a day-to-day basis, looking at how we run our businesses and how we do things. We've all been forced to change over the last 6 weeks or so, and we've all seen that we can do things differently and do things maybe more efficiently and more cost effectively and more sustainably than we were doing them before. How do we keep that going? How do we continue to do that and push that? And where else can we apply those things? What else can we do? And then thirdly, I think it is sort of taking this long-term, long-range view. What do your building plans have now? What infrastructure needs do you have? What sort of project constraints do you have that where the Port Authority could maybe come in and be a partner with you to look at, how do we move to that more sustainable, that smarter, that more equitable way of building, developing property, building property, managing property going forward? And how can the Port Authority partner with you to help you do that?
Yeah, I'd heard Jack say at one time, and I'll probably botch your quote, but you spend all this time repairing dirty logistics or doing cleanup. This is an opportunity for us to start the right way and build out the correct way versus doing some cleanup and kind of saying, well, we messed this up, we can move forward. We have a really unique opportunity to start the right way.
Yeah. It's a heck of a lot cheaper to build it right in the beginning than it is to try to go back and clean it up later.
Yeah.
There you go.
Sure.
Yeah. And what greater opportunity than now to do that.
Yeah, exactly.
We do have, and we're getting close on time, and we do have a few questions that have come in from the audience. So if you'll permit me, I'd love to just ask a couple of those. The first of which is, will developers be allowed to buy ground for development?
So all the ground out there is privately held today. The Port Authority doesn't own a single square foot of dirt out there. Now that could change over time, but right now that is the way it is. So yeah, just go make your deal, and yes, you can buy land in those areas, and that will be true as we step out into the rural areas as well. We have the authority and the ability through the legislation to own property, but currently we don't. So as we move into other areas, that could change, but currently, yeah, it's fully private, it's private ownership, and we see that continuing.
Do you see a role, just as a follow-up on that, do you see a role for the inland port in some of those land deals? Obviously, they're private transactions, but is there any sort of informing or, you know, sidecar, if you will, that the inland port will play in those transactions moving forward?
Well, I think where we have a jurisdictional area, a jurisdictional boundary like we have out there, that's going to put kind of four corners on what we can do with our dollars, with our monies. And it's always going to be around logistics related facilities, whether they be for manufacturing or warehouse distribution or whatever those be. So that's always going to sort of be the box that we play in, is around logistics and around the types of facilities and support for those kinds of developments.
And we want to help to that end.
Mhm.
If there are deals that are happening, you know, we've been in a lot of meetings with some deals that are already starting to flow a little bit, and it's good to be a part of that and to see where we fit into that. And across the state, every area is going to be just a little bit different and a little bit unique. And we definitely want to make sure that we are playing a role in being a partner.
Thank you. Along those same lines, will building permits be issued via the city through regular channels?
Yeah, they will. The cities retain their jurisdiction in permitting, land use, their master plans, you know, all those types of things will still be followed. And we see that continuing on, you know, not just out here, but wherever we go around the state. That's appropriate for them. That's an appropriate action for the cities to take. And we don't need to be stepping into those shoes. Like I said, we hope to be able to create some incentives working with those jurisdictions, the cities and other municipalities, to create some incentives and some benefits to development in those jurisdictional areas. But that will remain with those municipalities. Yes.
Okay. And along with that, is there an impact fee schedule available?
We don't have an impact fee schedule. We're not assessing impact fees.
That's an easy answer. Another question coming in: how is the Utah Inland Port Authority addressing the workforce as it relates to housing partnerships with higher education, vehicle trips, et cetera?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and that goes a little bit to the smarter port, more sustainable port, but it really goes to the equity issue, the equity question. One of the things that we think is a huge opportunity for the port is to help drive innovation in workforce training and help drive workforce training programs to some of these new technologies and new programs that need to be required. I mean, we are going to be rapidly moving toward the day where we will need way fewer diesel mechanics than we have today. We'll need more battery technicians and hydrogen fuel cell technicians and things like that. And interestingly enough, Utah and the Salt Lake City area is the largest trucking and rail maintenance and operations center between Chicago and the West Coast. And
wow.
it's because everything comes through here, right? And we're halfway in between. So we have an opportunity really to be that hub of innovation and creativity around those new technologies, around the training to support the ongoing maintenance and operation of those new technologies, and working with partners in, you know, some of Ginger's work that she's had really goes to that very specific issue.
Yeah, a little known fact is that Salt Lake Community College, their West Point campus, is actually on our jurisdictional land area, and they own some land around there. We've been talking with Salt Lake Community College about some of their training opportunities. They already trained to some energy technicians. How do we enhance that? How do we grow those programs? And how do we meet the needs of the businesses in our jurisdictional area that can take advantage of those programs right in their backyard? So there's so many opportunities to develop out workforce partnerships. It's actually really exciting.
Really is.
So we are running right up to time, and there are some more questions coming in. I would say a couple of things. First of all, can you direct us, where are some good sources of information? We're not going to be able to answer all of these questions, but where could people go to find out more about some of the questions they have today and going forward?
Yeah, well, our website, our strategic plan, and some of the technical appendices to our strategic plan may get into a little more detail, some of the kinds of things you'd like to look at. And that is at inlandportauthority.utah.gov. It's a brand new website. It's only been up about a month. Inlandportauthority.utah.gov. Our strategic plan document is there. And like I said, all the technical appendices are there. That's a good source of information. And then also questions and other FAQs that we've had over the past. Those are going to be posted and continuously updated there, as well as we start to develop policies and programs. We'll actually be back out engaging with the community more, our stakeholders and the broader community around what types of policies and programs we should be developing, how we're going to deploy them, what those things are going to look like. And we'll be engaging with NAIOP, with Utah Manufacturing Association, Utah Trucking Association, with other groups like that, as well as these community groups and things about any of that input as well. So there'll be a lot of opportunity for back and forth, as well as just informational stuff on our website.
And our next phase of development is advisory committees and working with the experts, the technical experts, on getting their feedback. And I would suggest that if anybody had questions, I would love to meet with anybody that would like to know more and dig in a little bit more. And we want to know how we can work with the local community. All of your membership base would love to talk with folks. So feel free to share my information, Josh.
Fantastic. Certainly we appreciate that. And I can vouch, at least for NAIOP Utah and for our audience, that again, generally speaking, I feel like is a pretty supportive group as far as it relates to what you guys are doing out there. And really, taking a step back, just if I could, looking over everything we just talked about, it's really exciting to hear, and kind of your excitement is pretty infectious as well. But at the end of the day, I mean, most of us believe in, at least most of us here believe in what we know to be this hidden, secret of Utah that is no longer so hidden anymore. And the outside world is really kind of starting to shine their lights and focus on Utah as being a major impactful place for what we're doing in the country moving forward, and not just real estate speaking, but it's really exciting to see the role that the inland port plays in that, and particularly shedding the light on Utah and what we have to offer here. So I think just from an economic development and just from an overall interest standpoint, it's really cool what you guys are doing, especially interested in a lot of the innovation and sustainability aspects that you guys are talking to. So I would highly encourage all of you on the call, anybody listening to this afterwards, to go to the website, read through the strategic business plan, and we can certainly feel free to reach out to me, and I can pass on Ginger's information if you want to reach out to them directly. But again, really exciting stuff, guys. It's 11 o'clock right now, so I want to thank you very much from NAIOP and from our audience for your time, for your interest, and for what you're doing out there. And also thank all of our sponsors and everybody chiming in. So Jack and Ginger, thank you very much. This is a good conversation.
Thanks, Josh. We really appreciate it. And thank you all for taking time today. We appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you, everybody.